times. I guess some people's is bigger, different maybe than others, and mine must be bigger than it.
Where's Neil and everybody?
Deer hunting.
Well, if somebody.
You're stuck with me this morning.
Well, that'll be all right.
Put like a Band-Aid under that and it wouldn't pop them up, but I've never tried it yet, so.
All right, it's that time.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and get started with things. We'll go till we get done, and then we'll be done. That sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
And we'll just go on and start preaching and everything.
Yeah, we'll just take it all in all.
Take it all in once. So, all right, this morning, we're going to be on lesson number 7, and it's on page 28 if you're following along in the Sunday School book. And the title is The Boy Joash Crowned King. And when it says boy, it means boy. This kid was young, very young. And he was crowned king after some issues. His daddy died, and then his mama tried to kill everybody, and they hid him out, and there's all kinds of things that went on. But then he became king after a few years, and there were some things that we'll get into this morning. But we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 11. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 4, and then skip down 9 through 12, and then it'll skip down again to 17 through 19. And the kind of verses in between the ones that we'll cover this morning are just kind of telling the backstory of some of the things that went on, and we'll just kind of fill in those gaps as we go along. But you'll notice there it says the time is BC 884 to 878. And you'll notice too, sometimes this confuses people. When you're talking about times, BC times before Christ, they go backwards, they go down instead of up. You know, like we start at 2020, 2021, yada, 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 all that. In BC, it goes backwards because you're counting down to the birth of Christ. So this is almost 900 years before Jesus is born. So that's a couple of years. So a few people have been born and died between then. So, and the place is actually in Jerusalem. And it's and a lot of the story is going to take place in the temple there in Jerusalem. It's but the whole thing, the capital of Israel at the time, which was Jerusalem, which still is. But and then our golden text, that's going to actually come out of Job chapter 5, verse 12, and it says this. It says, "He disappointeth the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise." And as we get into the lesson, that'll become clear as to why that ties in with this lesson. But just in general, the he that verse is talking about is God. But so it's just like God disappoints the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. Now, when I read that verse, kind of what do you all think about when you hear a verse like that?
God intervenes.
Yeah, God intervenes and God takes care of things. And a lot of the problems we have, and and I know I preach on this a lot, and it may come up again this morning, but we sometimes cause ourselves more trouble and cause ourselves more pain as we go through life when we try to intervene when we should be letting God do the work and let God intervene. But we try to kind of pull things back and take care of things our own way, the way that we think things should go. And sometimes the way we think it should go is not the way that God thinks it should go. And times, and I've seen this, and I've kind of done this too at times, we'll go down one path, and it's not the path that God wants us to go. And then there's this kind of long detour of lots of things that go on before we come back around to the path that God wants us to be on. But the key there is, though, that God is always at work, and even though Satan is at work in the background trying to derail us and get us off of God, God is always there intervening, trying to get us to back on the right path and back on the right way. And, a child of God, God's not going to let Satan do harm to, and God's going to intervene and going to protect us from that. Now, whether we accept God's protection, accept God's intervention, that's up to us and things. So that's, but all that is really going to come into play when we get into this morning. Were you going to say something, Angie?
No, I was thinking.
Okay.
Get back.
All right, well, so I'm gonna read the introduction here, and then I'm going to kind of read through all the verses, and then we'll break them down kind of verse by verse and kind of go through the story, so. But the introduction at the bottom of the page there, it says, no doubt this woman who thought that she had destroyed all the royal seed, or the seed royal, considered she had made her way to the throne clear and secure. For 6 long years, she had no conception that one had escaped her bloody purpose. Now it was revealed to her, and her disappointment maddened her with the vengeance and excited the desperate cry, treason, treason. It is ever so. He disappointed the devices of the crafty. History abounds with the examples of the bafflement of the wrong, the conduct of Joseph's brethren, Thapolel and Sanballat and Haman and the Jewish Sanhedrin in relation to Christ are also instances. As skillfully as the wicked later plots, there is generally something overlooked, forgotten, which brings them to naught. Some witness of their crime is left undetected. They seem to have closed up every chink and cranny which the defeat could enter, yet it's found that some loophole would have been left. It says a good and true cause may be safely left into the hands of God. He will not suffer it to fail. And just kind of the moral of that whole thing is your sin will find you out. And what had happened here, the queen had thought that she was going to go in and kill all of her grandkids. And these are her grandchildren. She's going to kill them all. She was going to be the queen until she died, and nobody was going to do a thing about it. Nobody was going to know a thing about it. But that sin was always found out. And that sin, even if people don't find out what you do, well, God knows what we do. And we have this misconception that God is only in these 4 walls, and God doesn't see what goes on out there. Doesn't see what we're doing out there. And that's not the case, and that gets a lot of people in trouble. It got her in a lot of trouble. But I'm going to read through the verses here, and then we'll kind of break them down a little bit. Things. I'm going to move this microphone because it's keeping. It starts here in verse 1 there, 2 Kings 11. It says, and when Athaliah, that's the grandmother, it says the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal seed. But Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Joram, the sister of Ahaziah, which would have been the kids' aunts, or all the kids that she killed would have been her aunt. It says, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from the king's sons which were slain. And they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. And he was with her and hid in the house of the Lord 6 years, and Athaliah did reign over the land. And the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and fetched the rulers over hundreds with him, captains of the guard, and brought them to him in the house of the Lord, and made a covenant with them, and took an oath of them in the house of the Lord, and showed them into the king's son. And then it's going to skip down to verse 9. It says, and the captains over the hundreds did according to all the things that Jehoiada, the priest commanded. And they took every man his men, and went to come in out of the Sabbath, and with them they should go out onto the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. And to the captains over the hundreds did the priests give King David spears and shields, and were in the temple of the Lord. And the guard stood, every man with his weapon in his hand, round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple, along the altar and the temple. And he brought forth the king's son, and put the crown upon him, and gave him the testimony, and they made him king, and anointed him, and they clapped their hands, and said, God save the king. Almost like the British would say, God save the queen. It's God save the king. And let's go skip down to verse 17. And it says, and Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, and they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. And all the people of the land went into the house of Baal and brake it down, his altars and his images, brake them into pieces thoroughly, and slew Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And the priests appointed officers over the house of the Lord. And all the people of the land, whoops, I was going faster than the computer was. I hit the button and started reading. It says, and he took the rulers over hundreds and the captains of the guard and all the people of the land, and they brought down the king from the house of the Lord and came by the way of the gates of the guard to the king's house, and he sat on the throne of the king. And so, there's our main verses there. And you'll notice that in those kind of interim periods there between the where we read, where we stopped and started and all that, there was a lot of things that went on that it didn't talk about. And if you don't read the whole chapter there, it can be a little bit confusing. But like I was saying, that kind of just fills in a little bit of the gaps between what had went on and everything that had happened. But I'm going to start back over at the first verse, and we'll just kind of go through it verse by verse. And where this is really a story as a whole, it's hard to really break down and pull out individual things from each verse that's significant, because you have to take it really as a whole, as the story as a whole. But if we go back to verse 1 again, we're not going back to Job again. There we go. It says, and when Athaliah, the mother of Ahab, I cannot pronounce that, he was the king, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal. And that's what I'm talking about, that destroying the seed royal, that was her actually killing these children. And like I said, these were her grandchildren that she was killing. And you think about that, that's sick, that's just cold. And she has no affection, no compassion, no love for these children, not even her own son, who was the king. Part of that had to do with the fact that he was wicked, and and she was wicked, and those generations were just wicked. They worshipped Baal, they worshipped these false gods, they were idol worshippers, and to them it was nothing to basically sacrifice their children to Baal. They would literally take these children and throw them alive into the fire of Baal's altar and kill them. And that was the level of depravity and the lack of affection that these people actually had for anybody else, for other human beings. And we don't do things that graphically out in the open today, but it's no different than things that go on today. There is a complete loss of affection and compassion for other people in our world today, and we see it, every day. Now there are still some good people out there, but a lot of people they're out for one thing, for themselves, for number one, and they're going to get what they're going to get, regardless of who they have to step on, what they have to do. And that's what the Queen Mother here, that was what she was all about. She was all about power and authority. The whole time that her son was king, he was more like a puppet, and she was pulling the strings. And now that he's dead and gone, she has no puppet, so she's going to take it and just deal with it herself, and just do it all herself. But it says, I'm going to read just a couple of the things out of the book here. It says, Athaliah's life's work was of destruction. She did much harm. She did no good. She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. So there you go. That's who her parents were, Ahab and Jezebel. So it kind of explains a little bit about who she was and what she was about, and how she was raised. And that also brings something else to mind too. We want to. We hear it all the time. People blaming a generation. Well, this generation's this generation's that. Well, that generation is the way it is because of the way their parents raised them. And so it really goes back to what the parents did or what the parents didn't do is influencing the way a certain generation or a certain family or a certain child is acting. And that has a lot of influence. Now, there are situations, I mean, you do the best you can, and people are going to make their own choices. And there are a lot of outside influences on kids. But we've got a generational pattern here that even when we go and we start to look at and blame things like the schools and this or that, well, if the people were not willing to put up with those things, the schools and other places wouldn't act the way that they act and wouldn't allow the things that they allow. And the kids that are coming up, they're seeing these examples and they're just imitating what they're being taught. And when they're grown, they think that's just the way things are. They have no frame of reference, and so they just continue on. And that's why you'll see that's why generation from generation to generation, you see things and people move further and further and further and further away from God. And the only thing that brings them back a lot of times is when something bad happens. When there's a crisis or, there's something bad that happens and they seek and they realize that the only hope they have is in God, and then they return to God. We see that over and over and over again with the Israelites. And it's coming here. There's going to be one or two things happening in this nation, and it's not going to be 100, 200 years from now. What's either going to happen is the judgment of God is going to fall on this nation, or this nation is going to realize the way it's going. It's going to repent and it's going to return to God. It can only happen one of those two ways. And what determines that is the decisions that the people make. The church that's, sending out this warning to the people, we can't make people make decisions. We can tell them the right way and lead them in the right direction, but they're going to make that decision. And we have to be prepared either way. We've got to be prepared to receive them when they're wanting to come back to God, and we've got to be prepared to deal with the aftermath of God's judgment on this nation. And this nation is no longer held in such a high esteem as it once was. In the world, we see everything that goes on, everything that happens, and it's a direct result of the sin that's basically come in and taken over this nation.
Either some states are electing these Muslims to be their representatives and stuff like that. And they don't believe in God.
They believe in a God.
Yeah,
Not the God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another thing is people, there's as a whole, they're getting away from the Lord. They don't act like they're whether they serve Him or not.
No.
You take all these homosexuals and all these people that get abortions. The Bible says that, being a homosexual, that's an abomination to Him. And if they keep that up, it's going to be like Solomon. He can destroy this.
Yeah, this nation is nothing really to God as far as being able to. This nation is not more powerful than God. I don't mean it's not nothing to God, that God doesn't care about this nation, He does. But as far as the ability to bring this nation to its knees, that's nothing to God. One pandemic basically has shut down the whole nation for 2 years. And that's nothing. That's just a drop in the bucket. Yeah, exactly. I call it kind of a warning shot across the bow. And
the missionaries that were being held over in, I don't know what country it was in, I can't think, but they was asking ransom from them. And it was on the news every day there for 3 or 4 days. Then they quit talking about it. Did they turn them missionaries loose?
I have no idea.
I was wondering if that was this thing. Yeah.
And it's big news for a day or two, and then move on to something else. The next big thing. And it's always one big thing, one this, one that. There's a couple of things, the Amish have right. They're a whole lot better off if they don't have the TV and all these things and aren't plugged into all the politics and everything. Because the reality of it all is politics in this nation or any nation is a joke. It's a joke. It's just a power struggle between two groups of people who want power. That's all it is. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. None of it really matters. in the grand scheme of things, because the only thing that matters is God and God's sovereignty over this universe. That's what matters. And everything else that we create a lot of things that we think that matter, that really don't. And we get all tore up over things, money, power, fame, all these things we create. And we take a rock, pull it out of the ground, make it all pretty and shiny, and people kill each other over it. And we do these things. We think that the highest thing is to have the most money so you can buy more stuff that people make, that we just make. We don't create, we just make stuff. We take dirt, trees, and rocks and make stuff.
Money's good to me, money's good to, you buy some of these, have a roof over your head, and they'll go
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
other than that.
We've got to live within the society and the things of society. We have to have those things to live, but people spend their whole lives in pursuit of more and more and more and more of that stuff. And that's just pulling people away from God. And it's dragging them away from the real things that are important of life.
And, you see a lot of good people, but the more they get, the more they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the Bible tells us the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money. Money's nothing. Money's a thing. It's a piece of paper. It says the love of money. When you replace the love of God for the love of money or the love of things that you could acquire with that money, then it just leads you down a path of destruction, because it completely changes your frame of view and pulls you completely away from God. And we, as a society, there was a time when even in this society where work stopped. When, it was a traditional time, you had church time, work stopped. And it was a day of rest and a day of renewal and a day of worship. That's no longer the case. Work don't stop anymore. It's 24/7. Even in little towns like this. The only reason Walmart started shutting down again at night was because of the pandemic. But before that, it was 24/7 at Walmart in little bitty Stanford, Kentucky. Now, who in the world is going to be out at Walmart in this little town at 2:00 in the morning? Yeah, I know. You don't want to be at Walmart at 2:00 in the morning, even in this little bitty town. The things that you see at Walmart at 2:00 in the morning. But the world is always going, and it never slows down. It never stops. And we're starting to see a little bit of a pushback from people as far as like holidays. We've got all these stores. They're not going to be open on Thanksgiving. They've already put their stuff. They're already doing their Black Friday stuff now, so you go out and buy all this stuff a month before it even starts. But we're seeing people start to push back. But still, that's 1 or 2 days a year. There's no opportunity. And the thing with a lot of these places is the people that have to work in these places don't make enough money to actually live on so that they can really control whether or not they're going to work on Sunday or not. Because if they don't come in and work whenever the boss says you need to come in and work, go on somewhere, get somebody else. The only saving grace now is nobody wants to work, and they can't get anybody.
And, used to, well, take Cracker Barrel. You could go down and eat, take your family. There wasn't no alcohol in there. That ain't true.
No, it's not true anywhere. But they said that they had to do that because of the pandemic. I don't know what that had to do with anything, but that's what they said.
You've always got an excuse.
Yeah, there's always an excuse.
Always an excuse to blame it on something else when it's just greed.
Yeah, it's greed. Greed. Want to make more money. Want to make more money. Want to make more money.
That's what I never could. These people like in these stores and stuff, they need to spend the holidays with their family just like we do.
Mm-hmm.
But I catch myself when I'm cooking, well, I need this, run down to the dollar store and get it.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't need to do that. We need to stop. They need to be home with their families just like we're home with their families.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the only way it's gonna stop, is if people quit doing it, but they're not going to.
Yeah, it was too convenient, it's too convenient. But we live in a world that's driven by money, greed, and power. You know, one of the things, you all know I deal with a lot of technology stuff. Well, years ago, when you bought software, when you bought things to run on your computer, you bought it, it was yours. You don't do that anymore. You buy a subscription. You pay it for every single month. You got to pay to use this program or that program or this and that on that computer. And the reason they do that is just more money. They say, oh, we'll give you the latest features. I'll always have the latest updated features and this and that. But, you know, you go out and it was expensive. You paid $100 or $200 for a piece of software, but that was all you paid. Now you pay $20, $30 a month every single month. And they're making a lot more money. And it's the same thing with your devices, like this iPad, that iPhone, and all these things. Used to, I could take something like that apart and fix it. Something broke, I could fix it. Not even more. Even if I knew how to do it, how to take it all apart, it wouldn't work if I took it apart. If I took this, took the screen off, put another screen on it, just like it, it wouldn't work. Because they lock it down because they have to be the ones to do it. So we don't buy things, it's like tractors. You can't fix a tractor. You cannot fix a tractor anymore. Yeah, vehicles. Yeah, vehicles.
Don't say true mechanics, so not as many.
Yeah, I got an old car, which I still work on, but Michelle's, I opened it up, so you gotta take that to the garage.
About blaming people, other people for things. Just a little humorous, but I won't tell. There were some people in Indiana, and they were Nazarene, and they were out eating on Sunday, went out to eat for dinner on Sunday. And this man told her himself, he got on that waitress for working on Sunday. She said, well, said if you Nazarenes wouldn't come in here to want something to eat, said I wouldn't have to work.
That's good, man.
She's right.
She's exactly right.
Yeah,
She is exactly right. And there's no, you can't make an excuse for it. And then we used to eat out every single Sunday after church. And the only reason we didn't do it is because it's got too expensive. We had to come back. But still, I mean, we do it. So I mean, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. It's the convenience, but we don't think about the effect on other people.
Yeah. You know, we just like he was blaming her working on Sunday, well, he was there eating, he was blaming it on her, and she blamed it on him, which is right.
Yeah.
She's right. If people didn't come in there, they wouldn't open it.
Exactly. Well, why is Dairy Queen shut down now on Sundays? They couldn't get nobody to come into work. And things.
But not only that, a lot of things in life, you know, we want to blame somebody else for it when it comes, we searched her hard and probably come right back here.
Yep, exactly.
Right back here.
Exactly. Well, let's go to verse 2 now.
Yeah. Back to the left.
Now it says, but Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Joram, the sister of Ahaziah, and this was the king's sister, so this would have been the aunt of all these kids that the grandma was killing. It says, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, that's how you really pronounce it, I think, and stole him from among the king's sons which were slain. And they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. So they took him when he was a baby, he was just an infant, and took him and his nurse, and they hid him in the bedchamber of the temple. So they hid him in the temple. And they kept him there and hid for 6 years. And that whole time, she's reigning over Jerusalem. And the only thing that she's doing is continuing that line of Baal worship and destruction and things. So, and it says, and he was with her, hid in the house of the Lord 6 years, and Athaliah did reign over the land. And then in verse 4 it says, in the 7th year, Jehodiah sent and fetched the rulers over hundreds with the captains of the guard and brought them to him in the house of the Lord, and made a covenant with them, and took an oath of them in the house of the Lord, and showed them the king's son. So after 7 years of him being hid, she sends for all basically the high-ranking military officials. Everybody that was kind of like all in our government, be like the generals and the admirals. Everybody that would have some type of influence and ability to control the army, because what they were getting ready to do is they were getting ready to take the kingdom from her. They were getting ready to set up the rightful king to this kingdom, and they were going to take it from this woman, this evil woman, who was just out to really destroy Jerusalem. But there's a key thing here about all this. Think about this child being raised in God's temple for 6 years. What would have been the things that he would have seen in God's temple that he would not have seen if he had been in his own daddy's house and his daddy was still alive?
God's word.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. He'd have seen all the sacrifices. He'd learned about all the work of the priests. He learned everything about God for those 6 years, and they would have left an impression on this child, which would have been a good thing, to leave this impression on this child and to leave him with this understanding of God and what God's all about. So after 7 years of this, it's time to reveal him as the king. And so they send for these guards and these people to come, and what they do in the meantime there is, when they're all gathered there together, is they anoint him as king. They basically have all the people standing around, have him at the front of the temple there, and just like when Samuel anointed David, they did the same kind of thing. They anoint him as king over all of Israel. And it's witnessed by all these people. So now they have their king. Now they got to do something about it. And then make sure I didn't miss nothing there.
Would we be able to keep secrets like they did back then?
No.
It is remarkable, the fact known to so many persons did not in some way leak out.
Yeah. It been on Facebook in 5 seconds.
Wow.
There'd have been videos on the news, everything. No, we wouldn't have been able to keep that secret at all. It goes on here in verse 9, and it says, "And the captains over the hundreds did according to all the things that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they took every man his men that were come into the Sabbath, and that they should go out into the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. And to the captains over hundreds did the priests give King David spears and shields that were in the temple of the Lord. And the guards stood every man with his weapon in hand round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple, along by the altar of the temple. And he brought forth the king's son, put a crown upon him, and gave him the testimony. And they made him king, and anointed him, and clapped their hands, and said, God save the king." So you got to set it up here. And they brought these guards at every entrance of the temple. There were guards stationed so that nobody could come or go. And they were basically protecting him during this time of anointing, because after he was anointed, the word got out. And it got out to the queen, and that's where she gets all tore up and yells treason, and all this and that, and throws a big fit. But she's not legitimately over the country anyway. He is the king. He's the heir to the throne, and they're just placing him where he really needs to be and where he deserves to be. And it sets this whole thing up, and it sets up her end, is what it sets up, and him rising to be the king here. It goes on. It says, "And Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people between the king and the people. And all the people of the land went into the house of Baal." Now this is after he is set up in the throne, after things are taken care of, after she gets hauled out of the city, basically they kill her, is what happens to her. And his first command as king, which he has the Jewish high priest as his advisor, that kind of guide him. I mean, it's a 7-year-old kid, he really is not able to make good, wise decisions to run the country at that point, so he has to have advisors in. And so think about it. Think about if you had a 7-year-old kid running the country. I think sometimes you do, but and it's not just with the current one either.
I think there's a lot of them in our, politics system.
Yeah, yeah.
They may be 40, 50, 60 or whatever, but they act like they're 5, 6, and 7.
Exactly. So we got all this going on, but this 7-year-old kid is in charge, but he has some good advisors. And one of the first things they do is they're going to rid Israel of this false god, this Baal worship, and all these things. And it says, and all the people of the land went into the house of Baal, and they break it down, his altars and his images, break they into pieces thoroughly, and slew Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altar. So they killed him on his own altar. And the priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord. And it says, and he took the rulers over hundreds and captains and the guard and all the people of the land, and they brought down the king from the house of the Lord and came by the way of the gate of the guard of the king's house, and he sat on the throne of the king. And so they reestablished him. Now, there were some things, the lesson doesn't get into his later part of his life. I don't know if the next one does or not, just the also get made. But I'll just give you a sneak peek or a preview here. But later on in his life, when he is grown, he makes a bad mistake. Instead of, he had 2 sets of advisors. The old advisors that were his advisors when he was a child, that led him the right way. And then when he was grown, in his late teens and 20s, he started getting his own, he got him some new friends. And these new friends became his new advisors. And these new advisors, he was asking, advice on what to do. What do I do? He had some situations come up about false gods, idols, and this and that. And he was asking, and the old advisors gave him wise advice, the new advisors gave him some poor advice. And he ends up taking the advice of the new advisors, and it leads him down the path of sin, destruction. And they end up in the same situation that when he was a child, they were going out. So it doesn't end well for him, but his beginning was good. He got off to a good start. He got off on the right path, but in the end, things did not go so well for him. And a lot of it was related to the people around him. And it's the same thing with us. Who do we surround ourselves with, and who influences us and gives us the advice on the things that we need to do and the directions we need to go and the things that we need to do in life. And we got to think about that, consider it, because all that has an impact on us. All that has an influence on us.
Well, a lot of kids now, a lot of their influences from the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know they can same school too, you go out and do this, do that. They don't know anything about
Exactly. We've got a lot of kids in this world that have no idea of just the basic Bible stories that we grew up with. And they don't know anything about Jonah. They don't know anything about Moses. They don't know anything about Noah. We watch this little show. It's called Idiot Test. I think it was on this one. It says, how many animals did Moses take into the ark? How many animals did Moses take into the ark? Anybody know?
Took 2 of each kind.
Moses didn't take nobody into the ark. Angie fails. We'll send her back to Sunday school.
He was waiting on me, wasn't he?
But kids, for us, that's just a silly trivia thing that we get mixed up. There's kids, they don't have any idea. They don't know that and it's not that they wouldn't get confused, it's they don't have any idea who these people even are. They even get confused.
Well, I think it's just a story.
Yeah, just a story.
It's not real.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing about Jonah, it's that's just a story, that's fake. Well, it was just last year, a guy got eaten by a fish. And it spit him up, he got out alive too. And I guess, they don't think it's fake no more, but, those things are possible. And people think that these things are just impossible, and they're just fairy tales and stories, and, and the whole, and we don't have better words to use in the church than story. I say a story, a Bible story, it's a story, but people think it's a fairy tale. It's not a fairy tale, it's a story, because it's just the English that we have to use. It is the story of history. The creation story is a story of creation. And somebody just moved my mouse. You moved my mouse.
The book accidentally hit it.
Oh, you messed up the thing.
Uh-oh, you're in trouble.
Go down to the discussion questions. There you go. I see, you got me distracted. I was all up here and I saw this thing go haywire. All right, so let's go through these discussion questions real quick. Are they up there? Yeah. All right, you got them in the book. Who was Athaliah?
Evil person.
Mm-hmm. She was we call it the queen mother. She was granny. Yeah, she was an evil granny.
She got away with all the king's sons.
Yeah, it didn't work out well for him. And how was Joash saved?
He was killed.
By his aunt.
By his aunt.
Wonder how they kept them from crying.
I
They
don't
don't cry all the way around.
know.
Mine did too, one of them did.
The wall was deep, they couldn't hear him.
Yeah.
And they were singing all that wild music and stuff.
Yeah. He gets crying, they get singing. Why was it so important that Joash be saved?
To see people back to God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. God was going to use him. You remember that our scripture verse out of Job there, where it talked about God intervening. This was God intervening. God was going to use this child to intervene in this situation. And should we use human means if we are trusting God?
Yes, because I think he reveals things to us to do.
Yeah. God sends humans in our path. It's kind of like that old story that goes, it was a story back, and it wasn't a true story, it's just something that was made up, but it was back during Katrina, and they were rescuing people off the top of houses, and things with the helicopters and things, and, this story came about then. Like I said, this isn't a true story, it's just a story somebody made up. But it says, there's a guy on top of his house, and God, and he's praying to say, God, send a miracle, send a miracle, send a miracle. Save me, save the house, all this and that, save everything. And so God sends that. First he sends a boat. And he says, no, I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God. And the boat leaves, and he won't go. Well, so the second time, I don't remember what he sent the second time. Maybe, I think that's the third time. Anyway, he sends something else, another boat, a helicopter, something, the second time. And the guy says, no. I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God. So he says, okay. So that doesn't work. And so the third time he sends another helicopter. He sends that helicopter and the guy says, no, I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God. And so the helicopter leaves him. He won't go, so they leave him. So then what happens is the waters rise and the house collapses and the guy drowns. He gets to heaven, and then when he gets to heaven, he asks God, why didn't you save me? You said you were going to save me. Why didn't you save me? God said, well, I sent a boat, 2 helicopters after you. Why didn't you take them? And so God uses people to intervene and to help situations. We have to choose to accept what God's offering.
Have you ever seen people that they won't go to the doctor, they won't listen to the new things that the Lord has revealed to people, and then wonder why their cancer gets worse or this gets worse and that God didn't save them? Well, he tried to.
Mm-hmm.
He tries to now,
Yeah.
but people won't listen.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think other people can lead them to a certain point, do they?
Yeah, exactly. They think that they have to have this big lightning bolt from heaven to be able to, hear from God, but God speaks to people all the time. And God sends people to us. How do you think these doctors have the knowledge that they have? I mean, it's not, it just didn't pop into their head. Now, it takes a certain amount of intelligence and education to learn those things, but who gave them the ability to learn those things and to do these things? It's a gift from God. Those things are a gift from God. Let's see, it says, what precautions did Jehoiada take? Yeah, when it began to come time to anoint him as king, put the guards around to protect him. And it says, what happened to Athaliah? I didn't talk about this too much.
They got rid of her.
Yeah, it's a nice way, he put it a nice way, they got rid of her. They drove her out of the city gate and cut her head off.
I think she got what she had coming, didn't she?
She got the same thing that she gave to all those
Yeah.
grandkids.
Yeah.
So, what good results followed the coronation of Joash?
Well, they smashed a lot of stuff in David. Yeah. What do you call it? I mean, and that was good in the sight of the Lord.
They restored to Israel to worshiping God. The last thing says, what lessons may we learn from Joash's end? That was the last thing I talked about.
We need to be careful that we stay on the right path and don't get taken away by other people. If not, there'll be destruction
Exactly.
eventually.
Eventually, yeah, your sins will find you out, and your sins will catch up with you. So. All right. Well, that's it. Any questions? My computer's getting taken over anyway back there. I see it moving.
Well, ain't there a story in the Bible that where God was going to visit somebody and he came 3 times and he was disappointed that he didn't come. And he told him, he said, I came 3 times. One of the times it was a beggar, another time it was somebody that was hungry. I can't forget all of it.
I don't know what it is.
No, I don't.
No,
but I know what
I know what you're talking about there.
I didn't recognize the Lord working.
Yeah, well, the same thing with Basil, when his donkey talked to him.
Yeah.
He put all those people in the path, and then finally he was gonna beat that donkey. The donkey basically turned and said, "What are you doing?" And that took a donkey talk to his attention. I guess it was a donkey talk to me to get my attention. All right, well, we better get ready for service. All right. Round 2, just a minute. I'm here.
Jack,
Good
good to see you. Our other buddy, how are you? How's your dog? That's all we can do. Yeah, I'm with her today, so I don't know if she'll take care of him or you'll take care of him. I miss your singing. I miss it so much. I mean, it was a big.